BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen. For years, European regulators found they secretly agreed to build worse cars than they could have. Not price fixing, something stranger, an agreement not to compete on the one system that cleaned your diesel's exhaust. 3 companies. They controlled Europe's premium market. They called it the Circle of Five, and the fierce rivalry you paid a premium to believe in. The commission concluded part of it was never real. This is how they got caught. They marketed themselves as fierce competitors, racing at the Nürburgring, trading records lap by lap. That rivalry was the reason millions accepted premium pricing without blinking. It was a compelling story. It wasn't the whole truth. In July 2017, a report appeared in the German magazine Der Spiegel. Its headline was clinical, but its contents detonated inside the automotive industry like a fragmentation grenade. German prosecutors had obtained documents, hundreds of pages of them, and those pages described something that should not have existed: a network of coordination between BMW, Daimler, the parent company of Mercedes, and Volkswagen. They called themselves the Fünferkreise, engineers and executives from the 3 largest German automakers, meeting in hotel rooms and conference centers across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The locations rotated. Attendees rotated. But one thing never changed, according to the documents. The conversations that happened in those rooms were never supposed to leave them. The group had formed quietly, so quietly that its origins are still debated. Some trace it to informal discussions between engineers in the late 1980s. Others point to the mid-1990s, when the 3 companies faced mounting pressure from Japanese competitors and tightening European emissions regulations. What the reporting alleges is that by the mid-1990s, the Circle of Five had become a fixture: meetings scheduled months in advance, agendas circulated, minutes kept. So here's the question that matters, not just for regulators in Brussels, but for anyone who ever paid a premium for German engineering. If BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen spent years coordinating instead of competing, what did that coordination actually cost the rest of us? According to Der Spiegel's reporting, the scope was extraordinary. The documents described more than 60 working groups, allegedly running for over 2 decades. Suppliers, steel purchasing, diesel engine technology, exhaust gas treatment, convertible roof mechanisms. Investigators initially struggled to find any technical area the 3 companies had not discussed together. The supplier coordination, as reported, was the most damaging allegation. Instead of competing for the best components at the lowest prices, the 3 companies allegedly presented a united front, agreeing on specifications, on what they'd pay, on which innovations to reject, even when those innovations would have benefited consumers. A supplier who didn't like the terms had nowhere else to go. Beat. But allegation and prosecution are 2 different things. Most of that broader cooperation was never charged as an antitrust violation. When regulators finally acted, the case that survived was narrower than the story Der Spiegel had told, and it centered on one specific system. This is the part of the story that became a real legal case. Diesel engines produce nitrogen oxides, NOx, a pollutant linked to respiratory illness and cardiovascular disease. The solution, well established by the early 2000s, is a urea-based fluid called AdBlue. Injected into the exhaust stream, it neutralizes nitrogen oxides into harmless nitrogen and water vapor. The technology works, but AdBlue tanks take up space, and AdBlue fluid adds weight and cost. Between 2009 and 2014, according to the European Commission, BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen discussed AdBlue tank sizes with each other instead of competing on them. They agreed on a standard tank size, around 8 liters, that was large enough to satisfy regulators on paper, but far too small to deliver the emissions reductions the technology was capable of. A properly sized system would have needed a tank closer to 20 liters. Their own engineers had modeled it, and in these meetings, the companies agreed not to build it. The diesel emissions scandal that erupted in 2015, the one that cost Volkswagen alone over $30 billion, is usually told as the story of defeat device software. The AdBlue case adds a second layer. The software was the act of deception. The undersized AdBlue tanks were a coordinated hardware limitation, agreed between 3 companies. that guaranteed higher emissions for the lifespan of millions of vehicles. The defeat device software was Volkswagen's crime alone. The AdBlue tank agreement was shared by all three. The European Commission's investigation began in earnest in 2017, triggered by the Der Spiegel report. Investigators pursued the full scope of what had been alleged: decades of meetings, dozens of working groups, every claim in the reporting. By April 2019, when the Commission issued its formal statement of objections, the case had narrowed. The decades-long 60 working group story was not what regulators ultimately prosecuted. The charge that survived covered one conspiracy: coordinating the size of AdBlue tanks used to clean diesel exhaust, running from 2009 to 2014. One of the participants chose to cooperate, and it wasn't the one facing the largest exposure. Daimler went to regulators and revealed the cartel's existence. Under the Commission's leniency program, the first company to report a cartel it took part in can receive full immunity. By coming forward first, Daimler erased an aggregate penalty of roughly 727 million euros, down to zero. Volkswagen cooperated too, but later. It earned a 45% reduction under the same program, yet still absorbed the single largest penalty of all. BMW never sought leniency. The decision came on July 8, 2021. The European Commission fined BMW and Volkswagen a combined 875 million euros for the AdBlue collusion, 373 million euros for BMW, 502 million euros for Volkswagen. Daimler, now Mercedes-Benz Group, walked away with full immunity because it reported first. Daimler, zero. 875 million euros against three of the largest corporations in Europe. Measured against 5 years of AdBlue collusion, not the 2 decades Der Spiegel first alleged, the fine still landed as a rounding error next to the money involved. The broader cost extended past the fine itself. The German automotive industry had spent decades cultivating a reputation for engineering integrity, for building the best cars in the world, no matter the cost. Even a narrowed case was enough to dent that narrative. Premium German engineering wasn't only about what the companies chose to build. In at least one confirmed instance, it was also about what they agreed, together, not to build. So, what did the coordination ultimately cost? For consumers, 5 years of diesel vehicles sold on a promise of emissions technology the companies had agreed to cap. For suppliers, 3 of the world's most powerful automakers negotiating as one, according to the allegations, on everything from steel to convertible roofs. For the industry, a fine that will be remembered less for its size than for what it confirmed. That behind a 2-decade rivalry story, at least one real agreement was made to build less than the technology allowed. 3 rivals didn't rig 2 decades of the market. The record that survived scrutiny shows they rigged 5 years of it, and even that took a whistleblower to surface. For over 20 years of alleged meetings, nobody outside the room knew what was actually being discussed. If you want to understand how the automotive industry really works, don't watch the commercials. Don't read the press releases. Follow the minutes of the meetings they never wanted anyone to see. Because the most important conversations in automotive history didn't happen on stage at the Geneva Motor Show. They happened in quiet hotel conference rooms in Central Europe, between men who were supposed to be enemies. They weren't. They were partners, and the partnership lasted long enough to reshape an entire industry, at a cost the rest of us are still paying. The next investigation is already in production. If you want the scandals the auto industry tried to bury, subscribe to Auto Underworld and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the next one.